Good morning. We ask our children, Philip and Elaine, to send us Philip and Stephanie, excuse me. Elaine is a daughter-in-law. We were just with them, and that's why she came to mind. We asked them to share with us some memories, but then when they sent us 2 pages, we consolidated it to 5 lines. So here's hospitality and laughter are how we remember Pat Touchton. We spent a lot of Sunday afternoons at the Touchton house during our 4 years in Clearwater. She always had an open door to us. When we were there, we always felt loved and accepted, and we never remember a time at their house without a lot of laughing at silly things and inside jokes, like, what's that dog doing on your head? She was like a second mom to us in Clearwater. She even cooked for us, which is more than our mother did. And that continues to this day. And we are grateful for the influence she had on us during our time in Clearwater. And now I want to share with you the beauty of the life of Pat Touchton and her biography. You will find the words written on the back of your program, but there's some that have been added that the family would like for us to share. Patricia Margaret Touchton, known by her nickname Pat, was born in Glasgow, Scotland, December 18, 1947, as the only child to John and May Stewart. Her parents immigrated to Canada when Pat was 1 year old and shortly thereafter to Detroit, Michigan. Her father was hired at General Motors, as had other of John's relatives who immigrated from Scotland after the war. Pat's church background was in the Salvation Army, both in Scotland and in Michigan, where she was active at the Detroit Citadel Corps. In later years, she often talked about the early influence of people like Gene Hawson, who shepherded the young people as a youth leader in Detroit, and that continued even here in Clearwater. In 1963, about the time Pat completed her first year in high school, her dad suffered an on-the-job injury and decided to move the family to Florida. First to Deltona on the East Coast, and about a year later to Largo. The family became active in the Clearwater Core Church after settling in Largo. Pat was among a very involved group of teenagers attending the Corps in the mid-1960s. She was enrolled as a senior soldier, was a songster, and a soprano soloist. She was also part of, during our days in Clearwater, of what we called in those days the contemporary group, Damascus Road. As a young person, she always liked wearing the Army's unique uniform, including, listen to this, including the traditional women's bonnet. Pat graduated from Largo High School in 1966. Her early jobs included work as a waitress, telephone operator, retail clerk, and as a secretary in the office of the local J.C. Penney store. She also took classes at St. Pete Junior College. Now, she met her future husband, Jerry, at the Clearwater Corps shortly after moving to town. Although friends, they did not start dating until after high school. And one of their first dates was attending the Clearwater versus Largo football game, the rivalries, held on Thanksgiving night in those years. Since Jerry was a graduate of Clearwater High, There was a definite divided loyalty on that early date. But by late 1968, their dating relationship transitioned to an engagement to marry, and their wedding took place on August the 29th, 1969 at the Clearwater Citadel Corps. Commanding officer Brigadier Warren Fulton officiated. Brigadier Fulton was a very supportive and positive spiritual influence for both Pat and Jerry. A wonderful memory for Pat was her wedding gown, which was made by Jerry's sister Gloria, who was with us today. A few months after getting married, Jerry and Pat indicated God's call and a desire to enter training school to become officers of the Salvation Army. They were accepted and entered training in the fall of 1970. After the 2-year training program, they were assigned to the Army's Richmond, Virginia Dunston Corps. In June 1973, they were transferred to Williamson, West Virginia. A year later, while serving in Williamson, their first child, Christopher, was born. Now, interestingly, it is noted that Christ is not a native from West Virginia because the hospital of his birth was a couple of miles across the state border in Kentucky, where his birth certificate was issued. So you're a Kentucky Wildcat, Chris. In 1975, Jerry and Pat returned to Clearwater and resumed their active involvement with the Salvation Army Corps as soldiers. Pat worked as Morton Plant Hospital Registrar for a time, and Jerry was hired as a community relations director at the Tarpon Springs General Hospital, serving there 36 years. They moved to Pasco County in 1976 and settling into their permanent home a few years later in Newport Richey. In the following 3 decades, until her retirement in 2011, Pat worked a variety of jobs, including a brief time as a nurse's aide, followed by several positions with the Salvation Army, including probation counselor, social services staff person, and most recently, as coordinator of the Salvation Army's Transitional Living Center, otherwise known as the TLC, in Clearwater. She would often mention to Jerry the satisfaction of helping the people being served in social services and at the TLC. She especially loved helping the young single mothers and their children housed at the TLC who were so much in need of a stable home and an opportunity to improve their lives. In 1979, Pat took a break from full-time employment for the birth of their second child, Kimberly. A few years later, Pat served as the first director of the Clearwater Corps' Children's Summer Day Camp program. And we would just mention here that if you would like to make a contribution in Pat's memorial to the Corps, it can be designated for the youth program, which was one of her loves of the Corps. And Chris and his sister Kim, they were Pat and Jerry's pride and joy. Pat said many times that her 2 children were her most fulfilling and greatest accomplishments, and Jerry tends to agree. In all the jobs that she held and as wife and mother, it was Pat's Christian faith that was her underlying motivation and support. On the holiness table here are her Bible and Salvation Army songbook. In fact, the songbook is open to one of the songs by Sidney Cox, and she got his autograph right there on that song. and they're both marked considerably with highlighted or circled scripture verses and songs that she loved. One of Pat's life's long interests was learning. She was determined to finish her early pursuit of a college education. And with another pause from employment beginning in 1998, she completed her dream and earned a bachelor's degree with honors from the University of South Florida in 2001 at the age of 53. Her later years became more and more difficult with health problems mounting. Her life was centered mostly on her family, Jerry, Chris, and Kim. In the past 16 years, she had the added joy of the presence in the family of a sweet daughter-in-law, Susie, and two lovely granddaughters, Kara and Emma. Pat entered into the presence of Jesus on Sunday, January the 20th, 2019, at the age of 71 at HPH Hospice in Newport Richey. Well done, thou good and faithful servant.